All right, the next news item is a mixture of good and bad news, but it includes a call to action. It's bad news because it's about a notorious cancer quack. You guys know about Dr. Stanislaw Burzynski?
Of course.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
cure cancer, he says.
Let me give the quick background on this guy. So he has been selling for 37 years.
37?
37 years. A chemical.
That's 37 years
that
too long.
Yeah, absolutely. That he calls anti-neoplastons.
Sounds impressive.
Yeah, that he claims can treat many forms of cancer. Originally, this was a protein that was isolated from urine and blood, and then later just manufactured in a chemical lab. There's nothing really even interesting about this protein, and there's no reason to think or clinical evidence that it does anything, that it works. But he's selling it as a natural, effective cancer cure, cancer treatment. When even if it did work, it would be chemotherapy. You know what I mean? So he's marketing this as some kind of natural treatment when it's basically a drug that has lots of side effects. It's chemotherapy, but it's chemotherapy that hasn't been demonstrated to work. So he's essentially has been making lots of money off of desperate people, selling them expensive chemotherapy that's not FDA approved, that hasn't been studied properly. He is not an oncologist. He's never had any formal training in oncology, just an internist. So he's really practicing outside of his area of expertise. And I don't know, for some reason he's gotten away with doing this for years. At some point, the FDA did go after him. This was in the 90s. And he was indicted, and was investigated, and it looked like the FDA was going to do their job and shut him down. And then from somewhere came political pressure on the FDA. Essentially, we suspect that Senator Dan Barton was involved because he's been sort of a fan of alternative medicine and a defender of Burzynski, but the suspicion is that essentially the director of the FDA was got into a back room somewhere, and then they put the pressure on him to shut down the investigation. And in fact, the FDA not shut down their prosecution of Burzynski, they did a 180 and they started working with him to help him keep in business. Is that unbelievable? They essentially ginned up this idea that that Burzynski can continue to give anti-neoplastons in the context of clinical trials. So for the last 17 years, Burzynski has basically been doing fake clinical trials just as a ruse to charge patients for his anti-neoplastons. He's still charging them, which is unethical.
It's disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, like, a cancer patient could pay over $100,000 to get cash to get his treatments because insurance companies don't cover it for being in a worthless clinical trial. In the last 17 years of doing these bogus clinical trials, and these are just like the preliminary clinical trials, he actually hasn't published a single completed phase 2 clinical trial. He's only published a few worthless, basic science reports and case series, and it's been a farce. The whole thing has been a farce. While he's raking in the millions and, again, selling conspiracy theories about how he's being persecuted by the man, by the powers that be, and how, big pharma and other evil doctors are trying to keep the cancer cure from patients. And he's just this maverick doctor trying to cure patients. Meanwhile, he's making millions and not doing any science, charging patients for what is at best an experimental treatment and at worst is snake oil. The update to all of this is that the FDA seems to be swinging back, maybe because the political pressure has been lifted, has been swinging back towards going after Burzynski. They investigated his clinic, his IRB. So the IRB is an institutional review board. And in order to do any clinical research that's either funded by the government or that is on the path to getting FDA approval, you have to have an IRB whose main purpose is to protect subjects in human research, to protect their interests. But he has an IRB with his own people on it. And They haven't been doing their job. So the FDA investigated this a few years ago, and there was a long list. And David Gorski has been following the story very closely on science-based medicine. So you could read, if you just search on that on science-based medicine for those articles from Burzynski, you'll see his, and his recent ones will have links to the relevant older ones as well. Where long list of like failing to get proper consent, failing to protect the interests of children in the studies, failing to properly report adverse events, failing to properly categorize responses, destroying original data like MRI scans. So a long list of egregious research violations, like the kind of violations that would shut down not only a lab, but a university. If a university IRB were doing this and the FDA got wind of it, I mean, they would say, you're not getting any federal money until you straighten this shit out. You know what I mean? Which would shut down any federal research at a university, which would basically shut down the research at the university. It's unbelievable that he got away with this. And so he was supposed to, in the last few years, fix these deficiencies. He basically hasn't. The FDA now has just come out with their updated report, again, citing a long list of violations of him and of his IRB. And the hope is that they're going to do something about it this time around. But who knows? I mean, Burzynski always seems to slither away because from political pressure that he manages to pull out of his ass from somewhere.
And it seems like this is always the case, though. I mean, we always see the FDA making some sort of report about something like let's say Kevin Trudeau or someone. Yeah,
that was the FTC. The FTC with Kevin Trudeau.
Oh, right, you're right. But okay, so vitamins and health claims of things like Airborne. I saw an ad just today for Airborne online that was like, "Does your immune system need a boost? Take Airborne." Yeah. And it's like, how does this company still exist?
Because Congress has hamstrung the FDA on purpose to allow this to happen. That's why. It's not the FDA's fault.
I mean, it just seems like the FDA is just not doing their job. And I understand that they're not being allowed to do their job. Why. It's just infuriating.
To a degree.
Yeah, it is infuriating. All right. But this is what we're going to do about it. Okay. So now we have the FDA, the FDA put out their report with a shocking list of violations on this guy who has been exploiting children. And the reason why the FDA may have been awakened from their slumber is because of a recent death of a child receiving Burzynski's treatment. And the child died of hypernatremia. Sodium level was dangerously high, which is a known side effect of Burzynski's chemotherapy. So it's almost certainly an adverse reaction from the treatment. So a dead kid with cancer, that's the kind of thing that, wakes the FDA up. So we have a unique opportunity, maybe, to seize upon the FDA's report of their investigation. There also was a recent USA Today article, which is very critical of Burzynski, that David Gorski was instrumental in. And also Robert Blazewicz, who's also the other skeptic who's been working on this a lot. So those two deserve a lot of credit for keeping the pressure up on Burzynski. So what we're doing now is we're going to launch an all-out skeptical assault on Burzynski. And this is very specifically what you can do. We'll have the link on the show notes, but you can go to thehoustoncancerquack.com, thehoustoncancerquack.com, and on there you will find detailed instructions for how to write to your representative in the House and Senate, documents from the FDA that you could send them, the way to personalize it, find out if they have that either themselves or someone in their family has cancer, for example. How they'll give you a sample letter, but you can also suggestions on how to personalize it. And you need to do a follow-up phone call. So we have over 100,000 people listening to our show. Even if a small percentage of them, those that are in the U.S., follow up with their representative or their senator and ask for a congressional investigation of Burzynski. Maybe we could finally bring political pressure to bear from the other direction and finally shut this guy down. He's been doing this for 37 years. It is an absolute scandal.
Yeah,
it represents a complete failure of our regulatory system that this guy has charged people $100,000 or more for bogus therapy while doing fake research, not publishing anything usable, violating many regulations that are supposed to be there to protect people who are the subject of legitimate research. And he's been able to do this with very little inconvenience from the regulatory agencies. Occasionally he's got to defend himself in Texas or from the FDA, but he's done fine. Unbelievable. So let's see what we could do from our end to put some political pressure to get this guy shut down once and for all.
Let's do it.
Yep. Well, and we'll keep everybody updated if there's any, updates on this whole thing.